Magazine. Alex Newman is with us. Hey, Alex.
Hey, it's very good to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining my YouTube program. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions on great struggle taking place in the United States in particular, and its ramifications in global order in general. I mean, religion, politics, so on. You have published many articles on the deep state and global aspects of it. Alex, I think what's happening in US now affects other nations too. So let's start with values or religion. People from different religions, for example, I live in a Muslim society, you live in a Christian society, and many people from other religions like Jewish and so on. And nowadays, all they look concerned about their future, I think. It has something to do with pandemic uncertainty or great reset phenomena. Why is that?
Yeah, I think there's a very natural reason why people of faith are concerned right now. And we see this effort to globalize the world, to globalize the economy, to globalize the government, to globalize the culture, to globalize what we see on television. And what is very clear is that the people driving this transformation, driving this move toward globalization, are very hostile to people of faith. They really don't like the values that Christians and Jews and Muslims all hold in common, values like the traditional family, the traditional marriage, the mother and father in charge of raising the next generation and passing those values on to the next generation. And, they have a real hostility to a lot of the principles that are outlined in the Bible and that are also found in the Torah of the Jews and also in the Quran of the Muslims. And that becomes more and more apparent when we see the types of government policies they're putting in place. It's, of course, much more advanced in the United States than it is maybe in Turkey. But we see a war on the family. We see a war. We see now they teach our children in kindergarten that they can pick a new gender, that there's infinity genders, and they can take hormones and they can go have surgery to mutilate their body. This is a horror for people of faith. And it doesn't matter what faith. I mean, for thousands of years, this stuff would have been inconceivable. And yet we see that the very, very powerful forces pushing this globalism forward are very hostile to those values, and they're trying to turn our children away from it. So I think people of faith are justified in being alarmed by these trends and being concerned by where we're going. And I think as we continue on this road, if we don't stop it, the extremism is going to get more and more intense until really we see a clash. The clash ultimately is going to be inevitable because this transformation that they are pushing is not compatible with the traditional values of actually billions of people on this planet.
Well, President Trump had said the future does not belong to globalists, but it belongs to patriots. And the new American magazine, which you work for, points out that American intelligence community battled Pentagon in control of American politics. One side in this struggle is fighting for American interests and patriotic, but the other side is being used for globalism. So today, conservatives are still, yes, assertive, but globalists now seem to be gaining the competition or not. What would you say on that?
Yeah, I think in the public mind, the battle is very clear. I believe that the evidence is overwhelming that this election was stolen from the president using massive amounts of voter fraud, especially in those key states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia. And I think without the election fraud, the data that I've seen, the evidence that I've seen suggests that Trump would have absolutely won in a landslide. However, he is up against very, very powerful forces. And they've been warning him about this for 4 years now. When he came out and started going after the intelligence agencies, after the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and the others, they came out and very openly rebuked him. We had one guy, John Schindler, wrote on Twitter that the intelligence community war against Trump is going to a whole new level, and they're going to make sure he dies in jail. We had the Senate minority leader at the time, maybe the second most powerful person in the U.S. Senate, Chuck Schumer, who now will be the majority leader after what I view as a stolen election in Georgia. saying that Trump is really dumb to go after the intelligence agencies because they have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. Now, that's not to say that everybody in the CIA or everybody in the intelligence community is a bad person or is pushing globalism. That's not true. There are many, many decent and honorable people who work there, people who love God, people who love our Constitution, people who love our country. But unfortunately, we see the rot that has infected the intelligence agencies is now systemic. It's to the point where we have people running these agencies who are openly hostile to everything we have traditionally believed as Americans. And I think John Brennan, who was the CIA chief under Obama, and also Leon Panetta, who was the CIA chief under Obama, are very good examples of this. John Brennan admitted in public in 2016 that he voted for the Communist Party candidate in 1978. And he told this to the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, the Communist Party candidate in America was an actual puppet of the mass murdering dictatorship in the Soviet Union. How could this guy get a security clearance, much less move his way up to the top of the intelligence agency and eventually run it? The same was true with Leon Panetta, who was Obama's other CIA director. This is a man who openly supported communists everywhere we could find them. The Sandinistas in Nicaragua. He voted to surrender the Panama Canal to a Soviet-backed puppet dictatorship that we pay, Americans paid to build, Americans actually built, unconscionable. He was very close to the Institute for Policy Studies. And yet these are the types of people who've taken over the intelligence agency. So unfortunately, I think you know, there's a difference, I think, between military intelligence and the other intelligence agencies. I think the Defense Intelligence Agency has been for decades now in pretty much patriotic hands. General Michael Flynn, who used to lead it, even during the Obama administration, was a very decent and honorable man. In fact, he was the man selected by Trump to serve as his first national security advisor, and I think that was a very good pick. But we saw how the deep state stepped in to destroy him almost immediately. They knew that if you have a patriotic, honorable man who knows all about what's going on in the intelligence community in such an important position, it's a very real threat. It's a very real risk to the power, the unconstrained lawlessness of these intelligence agencies. And so I think it's a very serious danger. Now, during the Obama years, we had 8 years of Obama, he did clean out from the Department of Defense many of our best and most patriotic generals and admirals at the highest levels of our military. And that was very unfortunate. And I don't think Trump was vigorous enough in trying to reverse that, because really Obama got rid of some of our best leaders in the military and replaced them with people who would go along with the globalist agenda, with the agenda to massively expand the government, restrict the freedoms of the American people. And I think that's really why there was so much hatred for Donald Trump in the intelligence agencies and in the radical left, and even among some of the establishment members of the Republican Party. So there was, during the Trump administration, this very real tension. Trump had an instinctive hostility to the CIA and their secret operations and overthrowing government. You know, Trump said over and over again when he was running, we're going to stop interfering in the countries of other people. It's not our business what happens in Turkey or in South Africa or in Afghanistan, right? We need to bring our people home, and we have plenty of problems here in America that we need to focus on without trying to solve every problem for every country in the world. So Trump instinctively was unhappy with what the CIA and some of these other rogue agencies were doing. Unfortunately, they were very, very powerful, and it looks as if they may have scored a major victory, at least in the battle. The war is far from over yet, and we'll have to see whether Trump was right when he said the future belongs to patriots, not to globalists. Right now, it looks like the cause of the patriots has just suffered a major defeat. However, as I said earlier, I think as far as the American people are concerned, Americans, even after generations of indoctrination, after generations of fake news and propaganda to convince us about globalism, the average American is still very patriotic. They still love their country. They still support the Constitution. They still believe in God. And so the globalists have a big problem of how do you convince Americans to come along? And so far, they haven't been successful with that.
So then what about church? Where is the church position here? I mean, do you think the Vatican and the global banking dynasties work together? For example, Carlo Vigano from Vatican, he's opposing the Pope, I think, penned open letters to President Trump, called the globalists children of darkness, and those who fight it are children of light. First, Alex, do you think there's a deep cooperation between American globalists and Vatican globalists? If yes, namely, who are they, and what are the common interests for them?
I think it's very clear that there is extensive cooperation now between the Vatican, between the globalists, and between the bankers. In fact, we don't have to speculate about that. They came out and announced it publicly. They formed this coalition for inclusive capitalism, bringing together the Rothschild, the biggest banking family in Europe, along with some of the other big banks in the United States and in Europe, and the Vatican and the Pope. So they're clearly cooperating together. This Pope is 100% on board with the globalist agenda. He said that from the beginning of his term. He went and spoke to the United Nations about Agenda 2030 and why everybody should jump on board. But he has not succeeded in bringing the entire Catholic Church along. And I think that's especially true in countries like the United States. There are Catholic priests, there are Catholic bishops, there are people like Vigano who have very clearly and very openly articulated their arguments against the Pope and against his unbiblical, un-Catholic positions. In fact, there's a very, very prominent nun here in the United States. Her name is Mother Miriam. And I'm a big fan. I was raised Catholic, but I'm not Catholic anymore. I now am an evangelical Protestant Christian. But she actually said that the Pope was teaching doctrines of demons, satanic doctrines. And so for a Catholic to say something like this is a very urgent warning sign. There's also a lot of questions about the legitimacy of the current Pope. He was brought in very unusual circumstances. Normally, a Pope serves until the end of their life. And yet there are very real questions. In fact, a powerful coalition of Catholics in the United States asked President Trump to please investigate whether Obama, whether Hillary Clinton played a role in ousting, they call him a Pope Emeritus, Benedict XVI now. And I think these are legitimate questions. They should be asked because first of all, it was very strange circumstances. And second of all, if you look at the positions that this new Pope has taken, that Pope Francis has taken, they really fly in the face of traditional Catholic doctrine and also in the face of the Bible, which is considered by Catholics and all Christians to be the inspired word of God. If you read the Bible, it says over and over again that it was God who created the nations. And in fact, Muslims have many of the same stories that we have back from our Old Testament. It's God who separated people into nations because that's what he wanted. And yet here we have a Pope who is very clearly trying to break down the barriers between nations. And he's doing more than that. He's actually demonizing people who are resisting this trend as if there were something un-Christian about it. It's a very bizarre situation. And then when, to top it all off, then we see the Pope making this horrifying agreement with the mass murdering Communist Party of China, which has been ruthlessly persecuting not just Catholics, but all Christians and also Muslims. They've got, million, maybe 3 million Muslims in concentration camps right now for re-education purposes. And yet this Pope Francis has given an incredible air of legitimacy by allowing them. I mean, it's the first time in history that a government is allowed to pick the leaders of the Catholic Church. It's unprecedented. So there are a lot of questions about this Pope. I come from a Catholic family. People in my family said, what's going on here? This is very strange. But the fact that the Pope is now working with the big bankers and the globalist forces, I think, is undeniable.
Yeah, then we have a coming soon inclusive capitalism then surrounding us, it's all around us. I mean, or say surveillance capitalism, big data, whatsoever, aiming at transforming the course of history through big tech companies. So in this context, the perception of terror and violence maybe will change then, right? I mean, people who oppose or reject the mutation of this new capitalism will be like new terrorists or resistance movements like in the movie Matrix. If this new great reset really will bring a new Matrix. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And we're seeing that already. In fact, we saw that very strongly during the Obama years. We saw documents that were being put out by federal departments, including the Department of Homeland Security, where they were openly telling our law enforcement and our military that people who are opposed to what they call the New World Order are domestic extremists, right? I mean, this is crazy talk. When they talk about the New World Order, they're really talking about this globalism. And they've now really come out of the closet with their agenda. They're pushing the Great Reset. They're pushing inclusive capitalism. These are really just new terms for a global system of government. And it's not really any form of capitalism anymore, because in capitalism, you have private companies that aim to produce profit for their shareholders, and they do that by satisfying the needs and the wants of customers. So they look out and they say, what do people need? What do people want? Okay, how can we provide that at a price that people are willing to pay, that people will be happy to pay? Inclusive capitalism completely redefines that relationship. So companies now are not worried anymore about making profits for shareholders. shareholders and satisfying customers. They're worried about meeting these goals that the central planners have established for them. They call it an environmental and social and governance goals. So they need to be concerned about, climate change. They need to be concerned about race, systemic racism, and these types of things. And historically, the role of companies is to produce wealth and to make profit for the shareholders. So this is really no longer capitalism that we're talking about. It's something much more akin to, and I don't mean to just bring up Hitler just to be inflammatory, but in Nazi Germany under National Socialism, they still kept the private property system in place. You could still own private property. You could still maintain ownership of your company. But instead of your company aiming just to make profits and make your shareholders richer by satisfying customers, your new objective was to do what the Fuhrer said. So the Fuhrer says we need tanks, then your company must go and make tanks. The Fuhrer said we need somebody to figure out how to turn coal into gasoline. Okay, then the company has to go do that. And so instead of doing what companies would do naturally in the free market, which is serve the people, they instead serve the leadership, the people who are deciding and establishing the goals of what these companies should do. And that really, I think, is at the heart of inclusive capitalism. A friend of mine, Patrick Wood, I think has really put the proper terminology on all this, and it really is technocracy. It's a movement that's been around for at least a century, but it aims to eliminate self-government. In the United States, we have a long tradition going back many centuries, even before the United States was founded as a nation, of what we call self-government. We govern ourselves through elected representatives. And of course, God is always sovereign. That's what they said in the Declaration of Independence. God created us. God gave us rights. And they said the purpose of government is to protect the rights that God gave us. And we do that by electing people to our legislatures, to our Congress, to the presidency. And then their job is to protect our rights. Well, this flips this completely on its head and says, nope, self-government is messy. You get outcomes that we don't think are efficient. And so the new type of government needs to be by scientists, by engineers, by technocrats who will do everything in the interest of efficiency and so on. Really, it means the loss of, I don't really like the term democracy because it means so many things to so many people, but I think that's a term in common usage around the world. And it really means the end of democracy in the best sense of the term that people around the world use it. It also means the end of self-government, and it means the end of individual liberty. You might have individual liberty within certain parameters defined by the ruling class, but no longer the freedom to succeed, to fail, to speak freely, to worship freely, to accumulate property, to do with your property what you see fit, because if that goes against the objectives set by the technocrats, then the objectives set by the technocrats will end up superseding that. So it's a very problematic vision for the future. And I think your average person around the world, if this was explained to them, if they understood the nature of what we're dealing with, it would be very simple. They would say, absolutely not. We don't want the Great Reset. We don't want the inclusive capitalism. We want to continue governing ourselves. And it's not perfect. Of course, it's not perfect. We're fallen human beings. It's never going to be a perfect system, but at least we're in charge. At least we get to be free. At least we get to make the decisions, and we don't have somebody ruling over us as if we are slaves or serfs or something like that. So it's a very troubling future that they are going toward. And as part of that, they need to silence the opposition, because if the opposition is allowed to speak freely, the globalists and the technocrats will lose. I think that's why we just saw very recently in the United States a massive purge of social media. We saw the president of the United States, the democratically elected president of the most important, most powerful country in the world, has been removed from Facebook and from Twitter and from YouTube and from all the social media platforms, along with thousands and thousands of his supporters, his key officials. And this is not because they thought the president was dangerous or was going to spark violence. This was because he was dangerous to their agenda. He was speaking out very clearly against the effort to build this globalism, this inclusive capitalism. And so he had to be silenced before millions and millions of additional people, not just in America, but around the world, understood what was happening and said, hey, we don't want that either. So that's the urgency. And we see this now in the United States. I haven't followed the news in Turkey, so I don't know if this perspective has reached there yet. But in the American media, They are now very busy portraying Trump and his supporters as terrorists, as traitors to the country, as extremists. And of course, this is ridiculous. Trump won 75 million votes, more than any other president in all of American history. To say that that's extreme is ridiculous. That's about as mainstream as you can get. And that's even if you don't include the election fraud, which for me was very clear. So it's not an extreme position to say that we want to keep our freedom, we want to keep our country, we want to keep our Constitution, but we see the big technology companies and the powerful elites trying to shape that in the public mind.
Evet, Amerika'dan dünyaya bakmaya çalıştık. Amerikalı sağcı muhafazakarlar ne için, ne uğruna savaşıyorlar, neye inanıyorlar ve onları ileri iten, küreselcilere meydan okumaya iten sebepler nelerdir? Alex Newman bize anlattı ve katkılarından ötürü kendisine teşekkür ediyoruz. Hoşça kalın.